Doesn't have to be about Nansen, can be about expedition travel if you're interested in that, or other expeditions.
I have one.
Yes.
What was your first sources for all this remarkable information? And I'm wondering if I could, on the U of T website, trace down his thesis, because my training was in neuroscience, and I'm wondering about finding his thesis.
I imagine that it would be very easy, although to be perfectly honest, Jim, I'm afraid I have no idea how you'd go about doing that. A considerable amount of my research was done, well, both using the internet, but also at the Central Reference Library, just, hauling down a bunch of books and reading up. I'm not sure at this point, because I put this talk together many years ago. I'm not sure I could tell you the original sources of the information, although there's a terrific book about Nansen, and I think it's just called Fridtjof Nansen. It's a slim tome. It's only about 130 pages long. But this was my first introduction to the man, and that's when I became aware of the second half of his life. Mostly when we, in the South, when we talk about polar exploration, it's all Scott, Amundsen, Shackleton, and that's all anybody wants to hear about. But then, of course, I kept seeing the name Nansen pop up, so I started reading about that, and then I realized the enormous impact that he had on polar exploration in the heroic age.
Oh, that's what I wanted. Thank you very much.
Hello, Peter.
Hi there. I wanted to make a comment about one of the first things you said about his first voyage on the sealing ship, the Viking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a filmmaker. In fact, I'm going to be showing the film here in a couple of weeks. And I'm also a student of early Canadian film. One of the most famous, somewhat notorious Canadian films was a film called The Viking, about a sailing ship, and it was filmed in Newfoundland. And famously, it exploded in a giant while filming, rather similarly to the recent accident in New Mexico. The cameraman, the director, 26 members of the crew were all killed in this accident. I wondered if you had any knowledge. It's, I suppose, a fairly common name for a ship, but was that perhaps the same sailing ship that he was on a few years earlier? Do you know?
Well, I don't know, but to be perfectly honest, it would not surprise me even a little bit if that were the case. I remember one of the companies that I work for is a company called Adventure Canada, which is a terrific polar exploration company, and they spend a lot of their time in the Canadian Arctic and Greenland, etc. And I've delivered this talk on their vessel. But with them, I both traveled into and out of Newfoundland and was put up at the Radisson there. And in the foyer of the Radisson Hotel, there's a marvelous model of a ship. And I was absolutely gobsmacked that it was the Terra Nova. Because, of course, my association with the Terra Nova is that this was Robert Falcon Scott's second ship, the ship that took him ultimately to the South Pole before his death. But it was also a terrifically important ship on the Canadian coast and in the Arctic, and it was hired because of its incredible durability. So these ships were specifically designed for working in areas with a huge amount of ice. They were designed to be rough and tumble. They were supposed to take a few knocks, so it would not surprise me at all if the Viking that he was on was the same Viking that was sealing in. And of course, the other thing about the whole nature of sealing was you go where the seals are. And up off the coast of the northern coast of Norway, of Newfoundland and Labrador and Greenland, of course, there were huge numbers of seals, which is why there has always been a seal hunt in that region. So I would not be even a little bit surprised that that was the case.
Very good.
I hope that answers your question.
Sure.
It's just an opinion, I'm afraid, but you've got me curious. Now I'm going to look into it.
Well, you can go on Wikipedia for a story about the movie, The Viking, which was the biggest movie made in Canada to that time, made in 1931. And even with the gigantic accident, it was released. And even though the producer and many others.
Peter, you obviously involved in this. You don't know if that film would be available through the NFB or anything like that, do you?
Well, it wouldn't be with the NFB, but it very well might be on YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I'm definitely gonna look into that. The other thing that's interesting to remember, and this still happens today, is that scientists, the overwhelming majority of them don't have any money. They get what little funds they can get from doing whatever it is they do. So they are thrilled to bits to be invited on any ship that is going into the areas that they want to go into. So as I say, for Nansen, I mean, it's not like he was a crew member. No, he was a scientist who was looking to study in the north. And this was his opportunity. And they said, yes, you can come on board, but you're going to have to, pull on some ropes and stuff like that to earn your keep. So this is when he became, such a crack shot, because this is how he contributed. But it enabled him to study the wildlife and what he wanted to study. And I have several friends that have done similar things, working on fishing boats, fisheries boats, oil boats, geological survey boats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all insanely grateful to have the opportunity to just to be as a hitchhiker.
Just an answer to your question about the NFB. I made a film called Popcorn with Maple Syrup, a feature about about film in Canada, from Edison up to the present. And there's a long story in it about the Viking, the making of the Viking, the release of it, with some many clips of it in there. So that film is, if you can't find the film itself, you can find my film about the Viking. Which,
I've written that down, and I will look for it.
okay.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Before I go over to Diane, are there any other people who want to ask questions and raise their virtual hand? Somebody, I think, is given a thumbs up, which is not quite the same. Does anybody else want to raise their virtual hand and have a question or comment? Please raise your virtual hand like typing Alt Y on your keyboard. Ron Jenkins is next. Go ahead, Ron.
Do you have any information on how Nansen was able to convince a crew of 12 to get aboard a ship with 5 years provisions and head off into the Arctic? I mean, what's the incentive for those people?
That's an excellent question. But I mean, bear in mind, these are all young men. They're in their 20s. There may have been a wage involved, although, and that would have been probably factored into his budget. Although traditionally, men like Shackleton, for instance, offered no pay. It was just an experience. It was just a chance to do this. And I mean, if you were 21 and somebody said, how would you like to get on a ship? It might be 5 years, it might be 5 months, and go to a part of the world that hardly anybody has ever been before. I mean, I think,
Yeah, I
think-
guess that's
think
true,
most
and-
people in that age group would probably leave that. I would have.
I guess that's true, and we do have people who volunteer to go to Mars on one-way trips. So yeah,
Listen, you know, it's for those of you who are familiar with the Shackleton story, and I'm sure many of you are at some level. He had a stowaway. He had a man who climbed on board in Brazil, and didn't show himself until the ship had been at sea for about a week. And ended up, you know, it was too late to go back, and ended up staying with them, ended up being a very, very valuable crew member. But yeah, they turned away more people than they took in just about every single circumstance.
all right.
If that helps.
Okay, sorry, Rod, I think I just muted you because there seemed to be coming some background noise. Anybody else want to raise their virtual hand? Which is a difference than a thumbs up. Okay, Jim, go ahead. Unmute yourself.
I just did a quick research on Kindle. There are several books by Nansen available on Kindle. So that's quite useful. I have a question to Peter Rowe. What was the name of the Viking movie?
His movie, he said, was called Popcorn and Maple Syrup.
Oh, okay.
That was his movie. It might not have been the documentary that he was talking about earlier.
What
Yeah.
was the documentary name? Can
We'll
we-
have to ask.
Peter's still there? He might have left.
Yeah. But he did say that his movie was called Popcorn and Maple Syrup and had some actual footage of the Viking in that.
Okay.
I'm certainly going to look for it.
By the way, you can click on live transcript on CC, and you can get a print version of what the person's saying.
Ah,
Very helpful for Peter's faint voice.
oh darn it! There was gonna. You mentioned the book on Nansen. Just recently, I read a post from a colleague. There's a terrific newspaper called not newspaper, but a terrific journal called the Polar Journal. And I've been addicted to it. They usually come out with 2 or 3 items a week. A lot of it is sort of aimed at the people who work up there in the science and in the tourism business. But if you're interested in the polar region, specifically the Arctic, I highly recommend it. Polar Journal, it's called. But they just recently did a story on Hjalmar Johansen, who, as I mentioned, was underrepresented or underappreciated as Nansen's colleague on the dog sled journey, was sent home in disgrace by Amundsen. And there's a new book out about Johansen, and it's shedding some light on the whole situation with Amundsen, and it doesn't cast Amundsen in a terribly positive way. I mean, it's not scathing or anything. It just shows that the man was human, and he had some faults as well, just like all of us. But it's interesting, and it's a book I'll be looking for. I don't recall the title, I'm afraid, but it's a new book about Hjalmar Johansen.
Okay, anybody else wants to raise their virtual hand and ask a
I tried to ask a question. Can I do that?
yeah, all you have to do in future is type Alt Y on your
I got a map. I tried Option and Y, and
then it should be Option. I'll show you. I'll send you an email. But go ahead.
well, in the introduction, I thought I heard that you had been to the North Pole several times. Did I hear correctly?
That is correct. Yeah.
How did you go?
I sailed on a ship, a remarkable ship called the 50 Years of Victory. It was a Russian nuclear icebreaker. At that time, it was the largest and the fastest and the strongest, and all of those things, you know, as you might expect. But it was the 50 Years of Victory. It was a Russian nuclear destroyer, nuclear icebreaker, as I say. First ship that I've ever sailed on where the crew actually outnumbered the guests, and that's because they had 30 people who were working in the reactor, or rather on the reactor, not in the reactor. But yeah.
So did the ship get to the North Pole?
Oh yeah, every time. And it's been doing it. I mean, before the 50 Years of Victory, there was a ship called the Yamal. Before that, there was a ship called, oh gosh, I can't remember now. Most of them nuclear, and they have all they've been, you know, tourists have been going to the North Pole for 30 years, 40 years.
So
It's incredibly expensive.
yeah.
And to be perfectly honest, if I'm being honest, I personally think it's a one-trick pony. You know, you spend 5 days getting there, smashing through the ice, which is fascinating and interesting. And then you get off and you walk around on the North Pole, which is like standing on an ice floe in the middle of Lake Ontario. That's about how much you're going to see. In fact,
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
but you know, you do stop in Franz Josef Land in a number of places, so there's a good chance you're going to see some bears and seals and walrus. But again, the actual North Pole itself, for the amount of money involved, you could do 2 or 3 other better trips, in my opinion. In my opinion.
Unmute yourself, Noel.
I thought I had. The name of that movie Jim was inquiring about is The Viking, is the name of that old movie.
Cool.
And just as another thing, the proper pronunciation of the Fram is the From. It's just I had to get that in. Other than that,
I'm sure there's a lot of
fascinating.
Norwegian
If
words
anybody
that I
gets the
used that were
chance to go
incorrectly
to-
pronounced.
Pardon?
I say I'm sure there's a lot of Norwegian words and cities that I pronounced incorrectly. You do your best, but what can you do?
You did really good, except
Oh,
for that one.
The From. Okay, thank you for that.
If you ever get the chance, that ship is in the museum in Oslo.
Yeah.
And it's well worth a visit. On the same island, there's the From, there's the Viking ships, and there was another one, I believe it was called the Maud, that they took off.
Yes, I mentioned that in the talk.
You were not here yet, no. And we
Yeah, the From Museum is an excellent museum. They're rightly honoring both Nansen and Amundsen and Sverdrup, and probably Halmar Johansson as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Alex, go ahead, have your final comments, and then we'll turn it back over to Diane.
Well, this is completely unrelated, but I saw with interest your thing about sea shanties, and I don't know if well, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the Canadian band Great Big Sea, fronted by Alan Doyle, and I had the incredible opportunity of sailing with Alan Doyle at one point. And he tells stories about the background of his music, and most of it is, you know, has very, very strong basis in sea shanties and stuff like that. But he spoke about the song Donkey Riding, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but the donkey was the winch that was used to haul up the anchor. And as you might imagine, in the old days, hauling an anchor up by hand with using a hand winch, a hand operated winch, was extremely, extremely difficult work. So the men would sing and chant so that they could get in sync as they're pulling up this enormous chain and anchor. And that was donkey riding. So just
Thank
for
you.
your next sea shanty, donkey riding.
I will look it up. I certainly will look it up. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have heard it before, but it has never come up as I'm looking for sea shanties online, but I will ask for it specifically.
And of course, the best sea shanty of them all, of course, is Barrett's Privateers.
Which?
Barrett's Privateers.
Years. Okay. Again, I'm writing it down.
This is a song that I actually sing on board.
Okay. Excellent. Well, I would just like to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And it sounds like you might have a few more presentations under your belt. That was awesome. Nansen was certainly an incredible individual and contributed so much, not only to Norway, but to the world with his work with refugees and of course, all his research in the North. It was interesting for me to hear that he promoted layering of polar clothing. As a girl from Winnipeg, I learned that a long, long time ago, but I had no idea it came from him. Thank you so much, Alex. We will be sending you a little token of our appreciation. And I'd like everybody just to give him a nice Shellback round of applause online. It was truly an excellent, excellent presentation. Thank you for your knowledge, your research, and your gift of time. Really, really, really important to us, and we all enjoyed it, I know. And I forgot to mention, for those of you who are new to Shellbacks, and there are one or two of you today, that by sharing a meal, and that is if you had some food in front of you, and sharing a shanty together, Shellbacks and guests become Shellbacks. And when you cross the sandbar and venture to that great cockpit in the sky, you may find a Shellback waiting for you.